Welcome to Rise from Switzerland, where recent restrictions are being lifted recently, and EHL has announced that next semester, which begins in 3 weeks, will be completely in person on campus with no streaming of classes, which is great news for all professors and I hope students. I am Professor Demian Hodari of EHL Lausanne.
And from very lovely London, a good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you're joining us from around the world. Thank you for being with us on Rise. We are delighted to have you all as part of our community across the Rise world, whether you're joining us on our dedicated platform where you can get involved in the polls, in the Q&A to our execs, and also, of course, getting involved in any of the questions you have for each of us, for Professor Hodari and myself, or on Facebook and YouTube Live. Thank you for joining us as we work together to keep the travel, tourism, and community hopeful and strong, looking at the future of our industry. Professor Hodari, it is remarkable. We are day 651. I have no idea why I keep counting this every week of our 100-day labor of love, and we are working towards our second anniversary of Rise. It's remarkable how far we've come, and we've still got a way to go, which is why this week is so important, because we have another great leader with us, giving us an aerial view of where our industry is at from a travel and tourism perspective compared to aviation last week. What is it this today, Professor, with both of us? Professor, save me. What are we talking about today?
Look, today I think what's interesting is rather than have someone here who looks at one specific industry, at aviation or at hotels or at restaurants, we've got someone who can give us a more global perspective and a more general, broad perspective of the overall industry and the interconnected parts that take place within it. So I think that's what's particularly interesting today. Before we get to her, before we get to the news, before we get to talking about that plant that doesn't seem to have changed at all in 2 years behind you, we want to hear from our audience. And we have a poll question for you, which will miraculously appear. Many governments are lifting in-office and school restrictions, as I just mentioned. Are you ready to go back? Let us know. All right, we're going to take a look at those results in just a little while. But before that, over to Anita.
We go to where in the world, and as always on every Rise, we try to get a sense of where in the world are we with our industry and its recovery, and what do we feel we want you to know to make sure that you're ahead of all the statistics. Now, the first one we're going to show is one that came out from the UNWTO just last week. UNWTO, very proud to partner on Rise with EHL, and it's looking at ultimately what were the results of 2021 and also going right back to the beginning of the pandemic, and what are some of the predictions looking forward. Now, I thought this was interesting from the point of view of, I've added onto the chart where the different mutations of COVID started to appear. And you can see how trends upwards suddenly were dropped down again, a very clear rhythm. Sadly, when we look at a year ago, where we thought we were going to be, we were hoping that 2021 would come down at a maximum of minus 20% compared to 2019. But not the case. We find ourselves still in a difficult position, especially as we know that Omicron now has a new submutation within it, BA2, and it'll be interesting to see what this does to travel and tourism, because sadly, that's going to be another knock to people's confidence. Thought this was important for everyone to see, and Professor Hodari, for you to know. Over to you.
Was that good news or bad news?
This was bad news, only from the point of view of there's something about seeing it officially out there that this is how difficult it's been. Who would have thought that we're at the second anniversary of when COVID became an international issue? And this is very bad news. What's also sad is that the curve has dropped again, clearly because of Omicron's announcement at the end of November. So we keep calm and carry on with hopeful hearts and committed to the fact that our industry will recover. And we need to make sure we do it safely and sustainably across the world.
Okay, well, I have a slightly different, unusually, I guess for me, I had a little bit of good news. So I've talked at least 7 or 8 times. I've brought in data over the last 2 years about the hotel market in terms of transactions. And, the expectation for a long time was that there was going to be a lot of distressed assets. Owners were going to need to sell their real estate because they had no business. They couldn't make their mortgage payments, et cetera. And so there was a lot of cash ready to pounce on those distressed assets. That never really materialized, largely because banks were very forgiving about interest being paid on those loans, and government stepped in to subsidize a lot of industries. And you can see a little bit here early, if you look, I want to point, that there in 2020, leading to 2021, there was very little transactions, very little number of hotels being sold, and the number of billions of dollars you can see was much lower. But look at the last few quarters, we're back to where we were pre-COVID, meaning there's been a lot of transactions in the last 3 or 4 quarters. So basically all of 2021, and a lot of forecasts that 2022 is going to be nearly as good. And there was a couple of reasons for this, and I'm not going to go into all of them, but the fundamental one is people are optimistic or bullish about the future of the industry, especially as far as investment goes. They see occupancies going up. They see that hotels held rates pretty high during this recovery. They didn't slash rates like they've done in previous recessions, partly because of research that has shown it's very tough to get rates back up. So hold the rates and occupancy will come back. We're seeing that. Investors are bullish. Inflation is rising in America and other parts of the world, and hotels are a great hedge against that, partly because you can raise your rates every day according to inflation, where someone who's got a leased apartment can't do that. Additionally, real estate as an asset class is a hedge against inflation. So there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic that the industry is going to recover. People are putting money into the industry, and I think this is a positive thing, unlike you, Miss Grumpy, there with your negative and scary data.
It's an interesting reversal of fortune. But I think you make a really good point, Professor, in that we've always said, if we want to see where the recovery is happening, follow the money. And it's so important what you're showing now in terms of the fact that there is momentum that's taking place. And we'll see it with our executive in residence when we bring her on in a few minutes' time to get a sense of exactly where is that happening. So rather than an overall statement about the industry, there are definitely signs of hope. And we need to keep feeding those to keep the entire travel and tourism community hopeful. And that said, we have a contribution from one of our Intel partners. Delighted to have Caroline from Euromonitor sharing some information with us. We are very grateful, because what we always say on Rise is we want the information to be fresh. So she has done that for us with some statistics coming out just last week, and we're going to show this to you now. What's happening with restrictions and travel bans around the world. As you can see, the dark blue is pulling back quite a bit, where borders are closed, flights are suspended. There's still a lot of caution when it comes to moving around, and especially when we find going into those darker zones, when you're transiting through those countries, as I found recently when going to the ASEAN Tourism Forum and having to go from London to Zurich, Zurich to Bangkok, Bangkok to Phnom Penh. Not an easy process, because countries have very different requirements in terms of protocols, in terms of locator forms, travel insurance, but slowly, we're starting to feel the lighter colors and those signs of green. So keeping an eye on this. Importantly, not everyone in the world is at the same place in the world when it comes to getting through the pandemic, but we're moving towards that. And it'll be a slow recovery, but we're getting in the right direction in terms of the colors. So Caroline and Euromonitor, thank you as always for being one of our Intel partners and sharing this perspective. Any thoughts, sir?
Look, I'm not going to talk about the content. What I'm going to say is I love 2 things. One, I love the fact that we've got so many Intel partners that help us get the message across. And I feel that there are so many people doing research on what's going on in the industry, people that were doing it before, new people doing it, bringing lots of pieces of the puzzle together. So I think anybody who's concerned or has got questions, there's always somebody out there who's got the similar questions, similar queries about what's going on, and you can always find that, especially if you know where to look. And I think Euromonitor is a great place to look for this kind of information. So I think that's the interesting part.
You make a great point, Professor, because what we've always said is we want to separate the news from the noise and make sure it's clear people have the right resources. So for anyone watching, if you do have questions, which resources to look into, let us know, drop us an email, and we will absolutely point you in the right direction. Because whether it's the UNWTO, WTTC, Euromonitor, CoStar, STR, ATAG, whatever it might be, we will point you in the right direction for information that you can trust to be decision-making grounded and something that you're going to need to carry forward. So please do drop us a line anytime. And now we move forward
All
to
right.
headlines.
Yep, and you mentioned CoStar, and for the second time today, I'm using borrowing from them. This is a headline that's a couple of weeks old, but there's something a good point in here. It's that the hotel industry faces short-term and long-term disruptions with events. Okay, nothing new here. We've been talking again for 2 years that the event industry was one of the hardest hit and what's going to be one of the last ones to rebound. And we keep talking about the fact that leisure has rebounded. People are flying again. People have been on cruises. People are going on vacations. Events has still not returned. And there's a couple of reasons for this. And one of the good points in the article was they've always been saying, CoStar's always been saying that leisure travel was going to rebound first. It has. They did think that small groups were going to come third after transient individual business travelers. But actually they're finding that a small groups has really been a stronger return than the individual business traveler. And I'm not really sure why that is. And I think I kind of raise it to say, I can't really explain it. I don't know why small groups are feeling the need or the willingness to go and have these sort of, meetings in hotels. And I can only think it's because everybody's sick of working alone, and any opportunity they have to get together, reconnect, establish more of that culture in firms, even in small groups, that is very important. And what I think that suggests is people want to travel again in groups. People want to have events. People want to have weddings and business functions. And so just like we had revenge travel in leisure, which is what we were calling it, let's say, a year ago or so, I think we're going to see that in business travel. And the article talks a little bit about that. I think as soon as cities are willing to allow or willing to host big events, because that's another issue. The hotel might be ready, people might be ready, but if the city are concerned about having thousands of people fly in, gather in these enclosed spaces, and aren't really ready to commit to that, well, you're not really going to have events. So there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle to get this sector of the industry back. And most importantly, there are many hotels that cannot survive without events returning. And I think that's what we're seeing again in the transaction market, is that these city hotels is probably the area we're going to see a little bit more of the distressed assets being sold, just because it's been so long and the prognosis is not great for those hotels. So we might see some action there.
It's a great one that you mentioned. And there's also one other element of direction of travel, because and we found this very much again going to ATF in Cambodia. It's not just the challenge of events being executed and putting into place all the protocols, bringing everyone together. It's the ability of participants to go back home. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of events are being canceled as well. It's putting too much pressure on delegates to actually be able to go back home again, because their domestic requirements are different than the place they're going. And it's just such a game of roulette right now. It's incredibly anxiety filled. So it is an interesting one, especially the whole principle of bringing people together, because as you say, people are desperate to come together, and especially milestones, which leads perfectly into my headlines, which I love how this coordinates, even though we don't share in advance, Professor. These are two headlines that came out, and we on Rise have always been emphasizing that please, please, please do not assume that everyone in the world is exactly where everyone else in the world is with COVID. These two pieces came out exactly the same time last week. On one hand, we've got Britain opening up and pulling away from all of the requirements in terms of masks, et cetera, and the announcement around that. And down in New Zealand, we have Prime Minister Ardern canceling her own wedding because now they have more cases, and she feels like all the other New Zealanders who've had to cancel situations and emotional milestones, she's just another one of them. It's exactly the situation of, same planet, different worlds, and we need to be sensitive to this, because around the world, not everyone is in the same situation. Exactly as you said, leisure is different from business travel. North America is different from North Asia, and we need to be compassionate around the fact that the world collectively needs to get through this, or we don't get through this. And that's, again, one of the great reasons we have our executive in residence. But to lighten it up a little bit, I thought this little video which I chose for this week, Professor, was great, because 2 years into the pandemic, 2 years in our work from anywhere lifestyles, we're still dealing with digital drama, whether it's the 5 official words of COVID, which are, "Can you hear me now?" or just the world starts to freeze. So I thought this was worth a little bit of a, we need to put this into the RISE archives.
You just want to meet your new niece.
Here she is.
But if slow upload speeds were to freeze your face and you accidentally snub a newborn,
Nothing is ever good enough for you.
just remember, you're not a bad sister.
This is going to be a problem.
You just need better internet.
AT&T Fiber delivers a faster internet experience with 20 times faster upload speeds than cable. Get AT&T.
Pretty good.
Thank you. I had a recent incident where I was on a call with my lovely girls and the World Bank, and I didn't realize my camera had frozen, but my look into the camera was clearly very peeved, which they took great entertainment value out of. So hopefully the next time we go through a crisis, we were able to get the digital world sorted out so we don't have those uncomfortable moments. So we continue.
So let's see what our audience had to say in response to our poll question. Grace, can you bring up that data?
Oh.
All right, absolutely. And I never left. So I think that's interesting because I don't think I wouldn't have marked either of those. I think I would have put yes, but only part-time. I don't know if I think actually I kind of like working at home a little bit. I actually get more done in terms of research. So it might be more about that than anything else. You?
It is. It's an interesting one. But it's interesting because if you think of our audience on RISE in terms of students, graduates, job seekers, professionals, so much of we're a social industry and people want that reconnection, but it's I think those numbers are going to continue to change as we move forward. So I love the fact that we get it fresh from our RISE viewers. So thank you everyone who has participated. And we move on. So delighted to have as our executive in residence, the perfect speaker to speak about One for All. Now, to give some context, the WTTC is a critical body in global travel, tourism, hospitality, and aviation, representing over 200 companies. And now ultimately the council is looking at representing 2/3 of $1 trillion in turnover, equivalent to 30% of the entire sector. Julia has spent 14 years in aviation, she being on the board of British Airways and Iberia and the chief of staff of International Airlines Group. Love the fact that she's now at the helm of a travel and tourism entity, exactly the right person at the right time. Before joining BA, she was a senior advisor to the UK Prime Minister, and I suspect there might be some advice needed in that area as well, Julia, but we want to keep travel and tourism. She is ever on the go, so we find her now in an airport lounge. We are thrilled to have you with us, even though you are in transit. Thank you, Julia, for joining us on RISE.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. And to Anita, RISE, the professor, I'm hoping to be maybe not in the grumpy category today. I think I've got some good news, but I just think that the setup of RISE is incredible. The contributors have been so interesting, and it's a bit of light fun as well, which is super. I apologize for the music. I can't get Heathrow to turn it off.
That's okay. Julia, I guess I'm gonna ask you that then. Give us some good news. Give us some good news we haven't already heard elsewhere, if possible.
Well, you may or may not have seen it, but the WTTC, as you know, just as Anita said, World Travel and Tourism Council represent over 200 of the top industries. We did some research about 3 weeks ago with an organization called Forward Keys, and they're a collaborator of ours. And they were saying, first, one fact that we knew, which there is massive pent-up demand to travel. There's also people have the finances to travel. But secondly, this organization looks at booking data, and it was looking at booking data within Europe. And just for Easter, booking data was 230% above last year's figures. And for summer, and because these numbers are a bit old, they were 83%. So I do agree with what Anita says. Different bits of the world are recovering at different times, you know, from the New Zealand model right through to the UK, which is now adopting a very open economy. But I'm very, very optimistic that things will start moving quite soon. I think China's going to be critical to this. question, and whether it takes place after the party elections in November. But I think once China opens up, that will, unless there's another variant, so I don't want to bet my money on it, but if there's not another variant, I think that will be the end of COVID for us. It will become an endemic and we will all go about our normal lives.
I hope that's true. I'm going to ask a quick follow-up if it's okay, Anita. I'm going to challenge you a little bit, Julia. So I'm a hotel or I'm a travel company. I hear these numbers, 230% improvement over last year, 83% forward bookings for the summer. But I've seen positive numbers over the last 2 years, which, as Anita has pointed out, haven't necessarily materialized because of the new variant or new restrictions, et cetera. So how can we recommend to firms or industry sectors to make forward-looking strategic decisions based on data like this, when over the last 2 years, forward projections haven't really materialized in most cases?
Yeah, Professor, I think it's a really, really good question. I think the only thing that I'm heartened by is that the Omicron variant isn't resulting in massive deaths or hospitalization rates. That's the big difference with this variant. In the early days, they were saying that this variant is likely to also to give us some immunity against other variants. The big ticket answer, though, is getting the world vaccinated, triple vax or double vax, wherever you are. And we were certainly backing organizations like the UNWTO that were highlighting that we still had about 3 billion people globally who haven't been vaccinated. So, but I do feel that this feels like a less severe illness. Obviously, we're not medics, we're not scientists at the WTTC. We've been following, and I'm sure you do follow this, Professor, Massachusetts General, and obviously the scientists who were somewhat ahead of the curve out of South Africa. And really, that is what we're basing our assumptions on. We've also done assumptions with Oxford Economics that we're going to be publishing soon. They're the economic data that you mentioned. This was the economic data that says travel and tourism is worth 10% of global GDP or $9.2 trillion in a normal year, whatever normal was, 2019. And that, as you say, has been really hit by 50%. So we're looking at Oxford Economic. We're about to publish some new data, which you and all your team there will be very welcome to see. And again, it is saying that we could, if there isn't a new variant, but we could be getting back up to 2022, nearly 2022 levels by the end of this, sorry, nearly 2019 levels by the end of 2022.
Brilliant. And sorry. Did you want to finish? I want to pick up something that you were saying, because I think one thing that's important, and I've always been arguing that the best metric to follow in terms of recovery is aviation. And see, to your point, Forward Keys is such a valuable source. And we actually had on Rise to kick off 2022. A fan of yours, Willie Walsh, was our executive in residence. He was fabulous to have on. And I've always felt that it's that quantitative statistics tracking that's important. 2 years ago, when COVID started, have that, it was qualitative based. Now we're in a situation where we have 2 years of data that we can actually look back at and make informed decisions about. When people are looking at the travel and tourism, looking at hospitality, whatever it might be, what do you find are the metrics that people need to look at to make confident decision making and build up that confidence about how the industry is changing?
Yeah, I think obviously look at the scientific evidence of what's happening on COVID. Places like General Massachusetts are fantastic. You know, really make sure you understand the status of the underlying problem. But then I think booking data is really valuable because you can see where what customers, you know, what they want to do and where they want to go. And the other data I use is that whenever a country has opened up, I'll give you a small example. Right in the middle of it, about a year ago, the UK opened up to the Canary Islands. The bookings went, you know, completely mad. And then, of course, they closed it again and it closed. So it looks at when places open up, there is a lot of demand there. So those are the sort of things that, you know, we are looking at. But I do take the point that there will be some hotel casualties. That you're already seeing some of the casualties. And that's tragic. As you know, we've lost 62 million jobs. And as I say, you know, about $4.1 trillion in terms of value that's been wiped off our industry, our sector.
Thank you. Building on that, if I can just, Professor, very quickly, you took very recently a very strong stand about the CDC and, as was termed, the bullying of the cruise sector. For our audience to understand what the WTP presents and its role a little bit.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because obviously the CDC is doing an incredibly important role. And I've always said that when countries are faced by a pandemic, it's completely natural that they literally pull down the shutters or pull up the drawbridges or what, you know, whatever the terminology you want to use, and they look to save their own citizens. We completely understand that. I think the issue has been some of the measures to deal with Omicron. It's been the kind of the measures from a previous variant, so they're applying the incorrect measures. Now, the CDC, who we have a lot of respect for, it's unique actually in the travel sector. They control, if you like, some of the travel normatives around prisons, around elderly people's homes, social care, and also around cruise liners. And I think one thing we've been arguing is those things shouldn't really sit together, because cruises, as you know, have got a long history of having to face actually illnesses and problems, you know, 60 years ago. They've now got operating theatres on board, they've got HEPA filters, all the crew are double vaccinated, they're tested daily, all the customers are double, triple vaccinated, they're tested regularly. So you're talking about a very controlled environment. And I think there was a concern by CDC that maybe a big ship might pitch up at a port and overwhelm the local hospital services, but that has actually never happened. And the truth is the positivity rates on board are lower, if you look at the United States, than is happening in the general population. So we felt at WTTC that the cruise industry was unfairly, we understand it came from a good place, but that they were being unfairly impacted. And they also did it's a technical point, but they did a very sort of strange thing. They had them in kind of special measures, then they took special measures off and just said, do what you want, it's voluntary. And while to many people they thought, well, that's good, you know, what rules do we follow now? But in fact, it's left the sector a little bit unsure. And consequently, some of the big companies have not cancelled any of their cruising, but some of them have had to cancel some of their cruising. So that's what we tend to do. If we feel that an industry is being treated differently, then we will step in and speak up on their behalf.
Which is
I'm
great.
not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to get a Christmas card from the CDC, but apart from that.
Lovely, because you're commercially agnostic. So that
Yes.
allows you to be in that position of support, rather than it seeming as if it's commercially motivated from one of the companies.
Exactly.
I'm going to change focus a little bit. Let's go back to this. You made a comment before about the jobs issue, and I want to go back to good news. You know, I think two good things that have come out of this horrible crisis for our industry. One was, I can now reschedule an airline trip without a huge penalty. It's easy. The airlines have understood they have to be more flexible. They want our business, and they have to demonstrate this. And the second is, and this is a double-edged sword, is some people who are working in the industry had a chance to sit back and say, you know what, I don't actually want a career in this industry, or I want to be treated better. And I'm wondering if you think hotels and restaurants and airlines, et cetera, are recognizing both things. One is we need to be more flexible, and we need to treat our customers with a little bit more, flexibility, let's say, respect, flexibility. Is that going to stay long term? And on the jobs front, which is clearly the big challenge for a lot of the industries, especially, I study the hotel industry, for hotels, do you think there's going to be long-term positive implications for this in terms of the employer-employee relation, or do the economics of hospitality businesses not really allow for better benefits, better treatment for employees?
Yeah, Actually, Professor, it's a great question because, as you know, we are suffering quite a lot of labour shortages now in what I would term the developed world. Of course, Europe and America, they're finding it very, very hard to recruit, and we know the reasons for that. During the pandemic, people have been working from home. They felt very insecure about their roles. Some of them have been furloughed. And they thought, well, listen, there are other sectors and other industries that are doing so well. Why don't I use my skills over there? So we kind of understand that there is a deep problem that we're going to need to look to. Sorry, the main point you were making though was that Anita was making. Just remind me again. It was the sorry, I went down a rabbit hole on the.
That's okay. I'm curious on the two fronts. Businesses continue to be flexible and
Yes,
recognizing
exactly.
that.
Yes, sorry, I beg your pardon. Yeah, so there are some great examples of that. There's a hotel chain called Sandals that operates out of the Caribbean, headed up by a fantastic guy called Adam Stewart. And he quickly realized that, just as Anita said, customers were worried, not just about coming and getting COVID, but if they got COVID, they could then be stuck there. And he's made this, but he's done it really smartly. He's looked at the kind of commercial aspects of this. But if you go and stay at a Sandals, this isn't an advert for Sandals Hotel, this is just an example of what he's done. But although it's a great product. But if you go and stay at Sandals Hotel, if you or any of your family members contract COVID, they will look after you. Any addition to your stay, they will pay for. They will then pay for any difference in your air flight home, although, as you said, the airlines have become much more flexible anyway, and I've seen some great practice there. And also, they will offer you a free holiday. So that's really interesting. But if you look at in the commercials, I imagine they've done their sums and realized that isn't going to happen too often. So it's a great offer to make. They genuinely deliver it. It makes people more assured, but then they have a great kind of testing regime when you go to their properties. So they're almost kind of protecting themselves against the eventuality that will actually happen. So I think we are seeing some differences. I also think, though, it's what you were saying, you kind of quite like working at home, and other people saying they like, really want to get back into the office and they want to get out. I think people, and the revenge tourism, I think people are desperate to get out. I was at the trade fair in Madrid, the travel and tourism trade fair called Fitur. Honestly, it was like, we could have a phrase in English about, springing for joy like pit ponies. These were the ponies that used to be kept decked in the mines, and then they'd be brought up for spring, and they'd just spring around. There was a real atmosphere of optimism, and the fact that we really do need these trade fairs. We really do need to be able to talk to each other and do deals. And there were a lot of deals that happened at that trade fair. So I think I'm very optimistic. I think people will want to return to work. And I think consumers, the research we've done says that people want to get to the great outdoors. They want to do more leisure, as you were saying, but they've been cooped up and they just want to spread their wings. So I am feeling very positive about the industry, I have to say.
I guess my concern, sorry, Anita, I guess my concern is, let's assume that there is a post-pandemic world. Will we return to the way things were before, becoming very tough on customers, becoming very tough on employees, et cetera? Or will there be long-term benefits? Or, because memories are short. And my concern is, let's just pretend a year from now we're, post-pandemic. Is everything, are airlines and hotels that are going to forget the, let's say, progress they've made in terms of the employee and customer relationship? And that's my concern, is that period.
Yeah, I think you're right, Professor. I think that there will be sort of brought into the system more flexibility. But what you have to remember with airlines, and I worked in the sector for a long time, is the margins are wafer thin. Sure. This is a sector that's massively capital asset dependent. The planes cost a lot of money, the fuel costs a lot of money, the airport charges cost a lot of money, your crew, your staff cost a lot of money. So it's and the competition is so fierce. It's interesting when airlines deal with other organizations like aircraft manufacturers, they're dealing with duopolies, really. Or if they deal with an airport, if they want to fly to London, you can say there's choice, but there isn't really. If you want to come to Heathrow, you have to come to Heathrow. So they're dealing engine manufacturers, you know, GE, Rolls-Royce, great, but these are duopolies. Meanwhile, there are many, the world is saturated with airlines. So the margins are very, very thin. So at the end of the day, something will have to give. And I think the way you were sort of presenting as maybe the airlines in the past have been quite tough on customers is I don't think they could afford to be anything other. So there might have to be some kind of business shift in the whole model, but either people, if you want complete and absolute flexibility, you're going to have to pay for it. That is my view.
Indeed. It's interesting the way you're speaking, Julia, because I'm a big believer that there's no back to normal, because there's no back and there's no normal. We've all changed. And as much as, especially being an invisible crisis, we are the travelers. We're not just the practitioners. And that's where I think what you were saying is so important about whether it's the forward key stats or the hotels. People are looking for those signs of confidence. We felt it at the ATM that there was this, you could see destinations were looking at each other and looking to, I mean, Ireland and Saudi Arabia stood out as two of the boldest destinations saying, we want people to travel back. And that confidence is almost a fuel that people need to keep passing on. To that point, I'm a firm believer that Mother Nature is a tourism practitioner in disguise. And we've always talked about the industry needing to talk with one voice. We've always talked about the fact that we're interconnected. We're actually interdependent. That's been one of the silver linings of this crisis, shall I say. The WTTC, UNWTO, IATA, WHO, CLIA, you've genuinely come together through this crisis. How are we a stronger industry because of this crisis? So whatever happens with the customer relationships, which I believe will shift, because again, everyone has felt it. Where do you believe this to be a covert blessing for our industry to finally re-engineer in a way that serves the industry of the future?
Yeah, it's a great question, Anita. And I think one of the things that have beset or bedeviled our industry or our sector is that the industries don't hang together, they don't stick together. And education is very, aviation is very much in its world, etc., etc., etc. And as you say, the golden lining indeed has been that we've been able to come together and we really work together. We formed such incredible relationships during this. I mean, you know, myself with you, yourself, UNWTO, WTTC, we've come together. And I think the other silver lining is that governments that were very, very dependent on travel and tourism have seen their economies destroyed and they've realized that they cannot go on like this. So, you know, we've got the attention of the trouble with our industries. We tend to talk in a bubble and we talk to ourselves. So I've been saying, I love to meet the travel and tourism ministers, but the people we really need to be talking to are the presidents and the prime ministers. Those are the people we really need to be engaging with as an industry. And I think we've now got that seat at the table, even though it's been because of a pandemic. We are now being more listened to.
Absolutely. And I think to your point as well, we are talking about the industry now in language that matters to them, the job creation, the investment, the votes, quite truly. So I think all of us are now around the same narrative, which is going to help. So shall we share, Julia, with our audience and ask if any?
Grace, any questions?
Yes, we have had a couple of questions in, and the first one is, why did you leave aviation to go into travel and tourism?
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for that question. I think the thing is, if you look at someone's career, I had probably spent 10 to 12 years in the aviation sector. And I think I'm just a believer that I think it's good to move and do different things and see different perspectives. And I heard about this role. I think the WTTC has done amazing things. And that was the long and the short of it, really. You know, I moved from central government to the private sector again for the same reasons. I know some people spend their careers all in one industry, and certainly for travel and tourism, it can be so varied and offer so many opportunities. But I just think the way I've always viewed my career is, you know, I spend a good time and dedication and commitment in one area, but if something else at the end of the day catches my, and of course there's the complete logic. I think I noticed that aviation was quite separate as well from travel and tourism, and I felt there's a need for a role to join up, as we were saying before. But thank you for the question.
But it's funny, if I can just add on that, because sorry, I mean, you know, I'm one of your big cheerleaders. I was thrilled when you came on board, because aviation is the primary artery of our industry. And cruise industry will say, but we can't get our passengers to the ports without the aviation. So you being there, that is such a fundamental part of the engineering of the entire ecosystem. So it's spectacular that you're with us, and it's a huge asset.
Thank you. And I also think around sustainability, you know, often hotels or other parts of the value chain in travel and tourism think, oh, you know, it's the planes that cause all the problems in terms of carbon. And actually what was interesting, since the 1970s, I mean, I wasn't there in the 1970s, but BA has been publishing environmental impact reports. This is an industry that takes it very, very seriously, its commitment to sustainability. It is investing vast amounts of money in sustainable aviation fuel, in buying cleaner aircraft. This is money that belongs to their shareholders. You know, they're literally investing hundreds of billions of dollars into this arena. And it is true, there is not immediately an alternative to jet fuel, but you know, boy, are they trying hard. And I felt it was almost like other bits of the sector didn't really want to include aviation because they were seen as the big bad boys. But we've got to get over that. As you say, it is the artery of our sector.
Indeed.
Okay. Grace, another question?
Yes. The next question is, what has been the most challenging part of managing so many different parts of the industry at once, and how do you choose which one to prioritise?
No, it's a very good question. Well, obviously we have members that come from the hotel area, as you were saying, from tour operators. And what we do is we have a OPCO, so we have a senior management board that will have the head of the Hilton group and various people, and we get together, we look at the research that's around, and then we set our direction. But I think everybody has felt, let's see how we can get travel and tourism moving again. What can we do? So in a strange way, this, as Anita was saying, the pandemic has united us around a single theme. And one of the other themes is, as I said, I understood why nation states turned inwards, but they've all come up with different rules. You know, I always give the example that at the same time, the UK banned travel to Mexico and the US stayed open to Mexico. Now, we may understand there are political reasons for that, but if you say that more or less they have similar scientists looking at similar data, you know, why would they do that? So we have been calling on governments to try and behave more rationally. And it's hard because it's a very emotional subject, but that's certainly been, and it's united all of us across the whole sector.
All right, Grace, I think we have time for another question.
Yes, of course. As you'll have seen recently in the news, there's the new variant, the BA2, and do you think this mutation will have an impact on travel?
Yeah, it's a very good point, and it's something that we are monitoring now. I won't claim to be an expert on it, and I was very interested to see the data earlier. I mean, it really all depends. If it starts causing hospitalizations and increases death rates, and you know, we could be back to where we were. But at the moment, what you've got to remember is there will be new variants discovered all the time. So there's a degree of how much the media pick this up. But I kind of get the feeling that a lot of people want this over with now. I know that's a strange thing to say, but I think unless it proves to be really harmful, I don't think it will stop the opening up that we're beginning to see around the world.
Julie, I have a question on that, to your point about opening up. In the issue of focus, I've always credited Willie Walsh because he's been always so good on forcing people to focus on, you need to deal with this, you need to deal with this, even in the traveler experience side, rather than on the pure aviation side. If we look at making sure that we do indeed get that lift at the end of 2022, what do you believe is a deal breaker that we as an industry need to get right and fix to be able to get travel and tourism moving again? What should our priority be?
I think one of the priorities is trying to digitalize just about the whole traveller journey. As I've always said, if I get on the tube, the trains here, buses in the UK, I just show my phone. And we need to get to that point, because then all the information, whether it's security information, visa information, health information, can sit behind that. And I know there are a lot of concerns about people's personal details, but we're giving a lot of our personal details to a lot of people every day. So it's a matter of making sure that there are proper safeguards. But I think that would get everything moving much faster, because if travel comes back with the kind of queues we're seeing at the moment, when I get out my little bit of paper, that's not going to be good. So yeah, let's hope that we can move to a more digital solution for travel.
It's to your point as well, because the stacks of paper now that are needed, showing your passport is almost secondary compared to everything else. And the delays it's causing. When I was heading to Cambodia, we left 20 minutes late from Zurich to Bangkok just because of paperwork checks.
Yeah.
It must be a nightmare through the entire team then as a result.
Yeah, and of course, the reason that is happening is because governments are putting the onus and the risk on the carriers. So the carriers are not going to let you get on, because if you get off and you haven't got a bit of paper, they've got to pay the cost of that. So, but let's see if we can digitalize it, make it smoother. I have to say, when I went to Madrid, it was very simple. So some countries are getting it now, definitely.
Brilliant. Can I sneak in another question, please, Professor?
Yes.
Excellent. Julia, my favorite question to ask leaders. Why are you a better leader because of COVID?
Well, I have to say, I think they've done a study on the type of brains that leaders have, and they have a touch of ADHD, and ADHD brains tend to like to solve a lot of problems very, very quickly and come up with solutions. So oddly enough, leaders generally are very good in crises. They kind of thrive of it. If anything, leaders can sometimes get a bit bored when things are going normally. But I think, what it's taught us, I liked something you said earlier about being compassionate and being humanity, because people have had very, very different experiences, and the experience they've had have impacted on people differently as well. We've all got some friends who don't even like to leave their house, and others that are, just want to get out there and start hugging and kissing everybody. But I think really being respectful of people's mental health and respectful of different customer types, I think it will make a better sector, a better industry all round.
This is the first time normally a crisis is there's an explosion and then there's a crisis.
Yeah.
We've had a sustained crisis for 2 years.
Yeah.
I think that's where it's forced people to think of the bigger context, and that's not a bad thing.
I've got a last. If I can follow up, I have actually, you're saying it's been 2 years. My last question, it can be a short answer, is have you talked about anything other than COVID at the WTTC or in your other roles in the last 2 years? I mean, we've got Brexit, we've got Russia, Ukraine frontier under discussion. We've had the elections in America, riots at the Capitol. Any of that making, the discussions other than at the water cooler, or is it just COVID?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And if I was to be completely honest, probably 70% of the conversations are around that. But, a large percent of the conversations is talking about making connections and getting people learning from each other. We've done so much reaching out and learning from each other around COVID, I have to say. But we've been talking a lot around sustainability last year. We went to COP26. We presented for the first time ever sustainability, carbon footprint, roadmap to net zero by 2050. It's the first time we've ever done that for a sector, because as I said, we tended to go off in our different ways. So we've been doing quite a lot around sustainability. We've also been doing a lot around how is a traveller thinking? How does a traveller feel? Who are the people that want to start travelling first? So yes, but I'll be honest with you, COVID has been pretty dominating.
I think you, that other 30%, you've worked on diversity, you've worked on women, you've worked on child trafficking, you've worked on life trafficking, and so there has been, the WTTC has been invaluable as an intelligence machine for the last 2 years on issues that COVID has put the spotlight on in a way. So I think that's where, as a primary resource, WTTC.org is absolutely invaluable. There's no question.
Stunning. I'm gonna let you, get on with your day, board your flight. I'm sure that's anytime soon. I mentioned this a couple of times in the last 2 years. I would love to get you down to Lausanne to speak to the students and to the faculty and have a conversation. So I'll be reaching out to you for that. Thanks, Anita, for the introduction. Have a great day. I really appreciate you sharing all this with our audience. I think it's been very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Julia, from my side, huge loving thanks. I continue to be a fan, even more so, but travel very safely, and thank you for being with us on Rise.
Thank you very much, Anita. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
She's fabulous, absolutely fabulous. And just how do you manage 200 companies all in trouble? I think it's just masterful and essential. So great to have her on.
It was. And Grace, it's going to be wonderful if you tell us what's up next on Total Knockout. What are we debating today, Grace?
Thank you, Demian. Today's debate is it acceptable for government/healthcare agencies to deem entire industry segments unsafe? Demian, you were arguing yes, so you get to go first.
Yeah, I get the fun one. Look, yes. I mean, I'm going to quote one of the great leaders of the world, Julia Simpson, who was just on our show, and she said, "Hey, we, the industry, we are not the scientists. We are not the medical people. We have to trust in those people." And so they are experts, right? They do have our best interest at heart. I do not think, and I am someone who's very, skeptical about almost everything in life. I do not think government agencies in most places are saying, "Hey, how can we screw around with the travel industry?" Or how can we mess with the cruise industry? I think what they're saying is, what tough decisions do we need to take to protect people in very difficult times with a lot of uncertainty? And yes, we may err on the side of caution, and and not everybody is going to like that. We clearly can't ask an industry to regulate itself when it concerns the livelihoods and safety of people around the world. So you, of course, if someone asks a restaurant, "Hey, you decide if you should be open or closed," they're going to stay open. We saw that in the early days of the pandemic, that shutting down industries, keeping people at home, helped. We had to figure things out. The virus was spreading out of control. Hospitals were full. But by shutting down restaurants, by shutting down schools, et cetera, for a period of time, we were able to get things under control. So nobody wants to be shut down. Nobody wants to be regulated by anybody else. But when it's a public health crisis, when it's a public healthcare system crisis, we may not have a choice, and we have to trust in the agencies that are specialists in this area. Anita?
Professor, I will agree with you.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so done. Let's see the final vote then, Grace.
That the entities do not mean to do harm. I agree with you there. However, sweeping statements is where, to me, the core of this debate is about. Exactly as Julia said, you've got travel and tourism, prisons, and elderly care being put in the same category. A sweeping statement by the CDC against an industry niche where you've got 95% vaccination rates on board of cruise ship are typically upwards of 95%. The cruise industry is the only one that actually requires both vaccination and testing for crew and guests. The issue is the sweeping statements. Don't take a cruise. We're talking about a niche that was responsible for 436,000 American jobs, paying $24.4 billion in wages in 2019. A sweeping statement will cause immediately the cancellation of bookings, the cancellation of insurance. So even those who want to cruise cannot go. It's the danger of the sweeping statement. So should they be making a statement of don't cruise, don't go on to airlines? That to me is the heart of this debate. That's the irresponsibility, that it needs to be looked at in terms of what are the consequences? Are the right conditions, are the right terms being applied to the right niche for the right reasons? Even CLIA turned around and said the decision by the CDC to raise the travel level of cruise is particularly perplexing, considering the cases identified on cruise ships consistently make up a slim minority of the total population on board. They have the ecosystem there. They're an example of how to get it right. And now they're being deemed to be dangerous and getting it wrong. That's a huge issue. So my concern isn't about the entities wanting to do harm. I agree with you 100%. I don't think they're trying to do that. It's the sweeping statements without considering the consequences and the science of that niche. So I do not believe that should be happening. And it takes a long time to recover those bookings. And more importantly, recover the traveler confidence, which 2 years into this, that's a stigma that no industry wants to take on.
Look, I'm going to rebut a little bit and say, of course, I agree with you. No one wants to cause harm, and it does happen, but these are unprecedented times, to go back to the cliches, etc. We have to trust. I, for one, would find it difficult sometimes to make a decision about what can I do with my family and still be safe if there wasn't some guidance. So where is that guidance coming from? It's coming from government agencies, it's coming from healthcare agencies, it's coming from people in these areas, Dr. Fauci, etc. At some point, you have to decide: do I follow these people's recommendations who are trying to keep us safe? And they may make mistakes and they may harm industries. And I'm the last one that wants people to lose their jobs or for industries to suffer. But the question is, should they be able to do this? And I think we have to allow them.
The application of the guidance.
Okay, Grace. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so we can't let Anita talk anymore, but maybe we can get to our summary.
Okay, it's time to vote. Do you agree with Demian that yes, it's acceptable? To quote Julia Simpson, we are not the scientists, we have to trust those people. What tough decisions do we need to make to protect people? And industries can't regulate itself when it impacts the health of others. Or do you agree with Anita that entities don't mean to do harm, but sweeping statements do harm? The cruise industry has greater than 95% of vaccination for its travellers, but they're being told, don't take a cruise. It takes a long time to recover traveller confidence.
So good.
She's great. All right, let's get those votes in. Look, and I'm going to say something, Anita. This is from an audience largely consisting of industry people willing to allow themselves to be shut down if government and healthcare agencies believe it. I will also say this is the sweetest victory I've ever had, because that was a tough one to argue for in favor of. So thank you to all my researchers who helped me prepare that.
Courtesy votes, courtesy votes.
Oh. All right, Anita, tell us what's coming up.
Excellent. Yay, Valentine's Day. Our next episode of Rise is on February the 14th. And so we have someone talking about destination weddings. I do. Do you? We've got Vikram Maddock. He's the managing director at Abercrombie & Kent in India, a brilliant location for destination weddings. So he's going to bring some style and romance to the Rise stage. Can't wait to have him. Everyone, please make sure you go to rise-weekly.com to register so you can get involved in the polls, in the Q&A, and asking questions of our executives and residents. We would love to have you part of it, or stay on Facebook and YouTube Live. Between now and then, we've got a 2-week gap. Go to rise-weekly.com to see all of the past episodes of Rise. You're welcome to join. And if you can see, to Professor's comment earlier, my plant has gone crazy. It's now crawling across my flat in the last 2 years. We again, special Valentine's Day episode, our fabulous executive and residents. Until then, between now and then, a very loving Shindian Quailu to all of those who are celebrating Chinese New Year, very special time of the year. And from my side, before I hand over to the good professor, as always, please stay strong, stay safe, keep your hands clean, safe travels, and stay with Rise. Thank you for being with us.
And do your homework and come to class. To all the students that I will see in a couple of weeks for the next semester. To everybody else, look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Anita and the entire team, thank you for a great episode. And again, thank you to Julia for being with us. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.